Get started. My name is Nancy Ehrenreich. I'm a law professor here at DU, and thank you to those of you who might be visiting our building for the first time. Thank you for coming. I hope it wasn't too hard to find us. And welcome as well to those who spend probably many more hours here than they would prefer. So one and all, we're glad that you are here. I appreciate you coming. I want to recognize the sponsors of this panel. The panel is entitled I can't remember the name of it, What the Corporate Media Don't Tell You About Venezuela. And it's sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Collective on Race, Place, and Law here at the law school, as well as the Denver Justice and Peace Committee, the DU chapter of the National Lawyers Guild. So those are our three sponsors, and I want to particularly recognize the members of the DU chapter of the National Lawyers Guild who have helped with all the kind of publicity and logistical setup kind of stuff, including Joey Chase over here.
Could you speak up, please?
Yes, Darren O'Connor, who is not able to make it today, and Naomi Martin, who is hoping to maybe be able to slip in at some point. But anyway, they were instrumental in making all the pieces fall together and having this event happen. We tried to organize it fairly quickly because we thought it was a kind of an urgent issue. We wanted people to be able to have information about Venezuela that they're not able to get in the mainstream news. I'll just make a couple very brief introductory remarks and then introduce our panelists. So Venezuela's been all over the news lately, as those of you who are here obviously know, but probably many people in this country couldn't find it on the map. And I've spent my entire adult life at this point, which is over 40 years, I would say, learning what I've come to think of as the geography of war. Becoming acquainted with countries' precise locations around the globe only when our government bombs or invades them or helps overthrow their democratically elected governments. And this is a part of the history of this country that many members of this country, or many people who live here and or are citizens here, don't hear about. And maybe couldn't make the list, right? Vietnam, Grenada, Panama, Nicaragua, Chile, Afghanistan, Haiti, Iraq, Yemen. It's a long list. That's just a few of them. And yet our country undertakes these actions, in my experience at least, with remarkably little information or public discussion about what we are embarking on, or our history, or our reasons for taking the actions that we take in any particular region of the world. And so often it seems to boil down to, four-word slogans like weapons of mass destruction, for example. Something that the younger folks in this room might not remember, but most of the rest of us do, as having been the justification now widely discredited for invading Iraq many years ago. Or today, phrases like humanitarian crisis, which is what I've been encountering is most commonly the takeaway phrase that my students have for why we might want to invade Venezuela. So it's hard to get the information that we need, especially in this era of increasing consolidation and corporatization of media. But it's really important, I think, and I'm sure all of you do as well, that we try. And so this is an effort to help people get more information about Venezuela, information that you won't usually hear on the nightly news, or frankly, a lot of times even on outlets like NPR. And I'm very happy to have with me two folks who I think have a lot of information to share with you all. We're also going to try to leave a decent amount of time for questions as well. So to my right is Rebeca Zúniga-Hamlin, to whom I also owe a big debt of gratitude in terms of helping to conceptualize and pull together this panel. So I want to thank her for that as well. Rebeca grew up in both Nicaragua and Guatemala. where she experienced firsthand the effects of U.S. interventionism during the Rios Montt regime and the Reagan-Contra War. From a young age, she has been committed to political action on behalf of the excluded by serving for the poor and underprivileged. Her own mixed background, Nicaraguan Mestizo Indian and white North American, has allowed her to commit to the long-term struggle for social justice, challenging unfair economic and criminal systems that affect the immigrant communities. She also has a keen understanding of the intersecting patterns of exclusion among dimensions of race, ethnicity, language, gender, immigration status, and class. Mother of two, Luna and Sol, Rebeca is the director of the Denver Justice and Peace Committee, one of our sponsors, a grassroots organization that advocates and educates for human rights in Latin America. To my left is Mark Burton. He's a criminal defense attorney in Denver who has a long-term interest in Latin America. He's organized human rights delegations to South America and an informal delegation to Cuba. He was present several times at the recent peace talks between the Colombian government and the FARC, which was the Colombian Revolutionary Armed Forces, the rebel group that I'm sure many of you have heard about. The FARC-EP, the EP was the Ejército Popular, the Popular Army. Those talks took place in Havana, Cuba. And also, Mr. Burton has some experience in representing a FARC EP prisoner of war. He's an executive board member of the United States Peace Council, an organizer of its affiliate, the Denver Peace Council, as well as a member of the National Lawyers Guild International Committee. So we're very lucky to have these folks here today, and thank you all for coming. Rebecca.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the introductions. And I will go first. I'm going to stand up just to use the 3 slides that I have. As Nancy pointed out, I'm from Nicaragua. I grew up in Nicaragua during the Sandinista Revolution, but I also grew up in Guatemala during the Rios Montt administration. And what I'm going to tell you here is my personal story of why I believe that there should be U.S. interventions anywhere in the world. So then I'll let Mark talk more about the Venezuelan conflict itself. So the story I'm telling you here is from the history of U.S. interventions in Nicaragua. So as we can see, for some reason, it's not going to the next slide, but anyway. It's open a couple times. There we go. Thank you. Technology always challenges us, but we have the power to control it sometimes. So Nicaragua has a long history of U.S. interventions. From the 1800s, William Walker, famous William Walker, el filibustero que vino que wanted to make us a slave state. Then in the 1910s to the 33s, the U.S. occupation and to take over Customs House to repay U.S. debts. And then the 50-year Somoza dictatorship, which is what brings me to the personal story. My family was kicked out of Nicaragua by the Somoza dictatorship, and that's why we had to go and live in Guatemala. And from the beginning, I've had, an understanding of, from a very, very young age. I was like 2.5. I've had to experience these migrations, forced migrations, because of U.S. intervention policies. So I grew up in Guatemala, and then I had to leave there because of what was going on with Rios Montt and the plan of the Tierra Arrasada, like killing all the indigenous peoples of Guatemala. And we have recorded that in history. There was a Truth Commission that has recorded all the genocide that happened there. So I'm not going to go in that. And then going back to Nicaragua during the revolution, I experienced firsthand the Contra War. I was born in a community in in the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, in the north side of the country. It's called Huaspam in the Coco River. This was a border town. So we all, even though we went back to live in the place where I was born, we had to evacuate again because there was a Contra war financed by the US administration at the time, the Reagan administration. And so it wasn't safe for my family or anyone to live there. So either we were sent to the cities or sent to some resettlements, Taltapri. So then, growing up in Managua, even though I was not on the border anymore, experiencing the fights firsthand, I was able to experience other ways of US intervention. We had airplanes flying over Managua, El Pájaro Negro it was called. You would hear around 11 o'clock in the morning a big boom, which was like a sound barrier because the plane was so fast. Some of you know more about that technology than I do. But that was me growing up as a kid, with the fear of an invasion at any moment. Some of my friends were killed. Some of my friends were also US citizens that came to work for the revolution. They were working in collecting coffee, and one of my friends was a clown, an engineer that came from Portland, Oregon. His name was Benjamin Linder. He came to build a dam, to generate electricity, and the Contra killed him and his coworkers. That was very sad for me. So all these experiences of US interventionism, La Contra, my friends being killed, the fear of what is going to happen to us. Is there going to be a bomb at any time? That is nothing that I wish anyone should experience. This picture here demonstrates he was a US pilot that was, his plane was pulled down by these Sandinista soldiers. His name is Eugene Hasselfuss. I don't know if some of you might remember him. He was all over the news. But that's like what I wanted to demonstrate is like, okay, so this was like this poor Sandinista revolutionary army trying to defend the country from these invasions with a lot of technology. Now we have more. So just to show you that the Nicaraguan people wanted the revolution. They had the right of self-determination. We might have not liked the regime. I don't think I like the current regime. That brings me to the Sandinismo. I lived the Sandinismo in the 80s. I lived the atrocities, the terror, the illegality of the Contra war. But right now, I can't say the same thing about the current government. And that is a different story. But what I want to say is that the Nicaraguan people have elected the current government. This is the same in Venezuela. So I think the people have right to self-determination, the right to choose their own leaders, the right to oppose their leaders. But these are actions that the people of those countries have to decide what they want to do. It's not our role as US government to come and say, this is what democracy looks like, right? We can give examples. We can try to show what are good examples, but I don't think that the US has good examples of what democracy is. So that is, questionable. So what I'm trying to say with my story is that I understand that there are many issues that we're worried about of the Venezuelan community and the humanitarian crisis, but we in the US are responsible for that crisis. We have, like we did with Cuba and Nicaragua, with the embargoes, we've punished any form of government that looks different from what we want. So I'm going to end on this note by saying that I hope that this talk brings you to think a little bit more of the history of invasions that we have had over Latin America. We have particular interests on the resources, but also all over the world. This is not the first time we're doing this. And this is not the first time that some people like us that want people to decide, to choose, to have the revolutions, to have whatever they want in their countries. It's not the first time people like me are talking to you. So I want you to think about how we can really build solidarity with the people of Venezuela, with the people of those countries that have been experiencing invasions, and how we can change our policies from within to stop being interventionism. Okay, thank you.
Can I ask you?
Okay, that's fine. Yes.
So
Can I ask you a
desconéctalo.
question?
We'll have questions at the end.
I'm just gonna use this for some notes.
Hello, everybody. First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Ehrenreich, the DU Law School, the Denver-Ricketson Justice Group, and the National Lawyers Guild, and all other groups that made this meeting possible, and thank you for the invitation. And what I was asked to speak on was sort of how the winds of war are blowing now around Venezuela, emanating from the United States. There's this famous saying that the first casualty of war is truth. And what I did, I wrote down a list of things I've heard in the press or from the US government about Venezuela recently. And then we're going to take a look and see what's the reality behind that, what they're saying. So I have this list, and these are things that the mainstream press and the US government are saying. And then I'll go over them individually. Maduro stole the election of 2018. Maduro is a dictator. Maduro mismanaged the economy to such an extent that the country's on the brink of complete ruin. There is a humanitarian crisis. That not accepting humanitarian, in quotes, aid at their border is unacceptable. That Guaido is the legitimate president of Venezuela. So these are, I mean, I'm sure there's more and more combinations of that, but these are the basic, what I found to be the basic untruths that we're spitting out now about Venezuela. And it's very dangerous because they're, President Trump talked about Venezuela in 2017, saying that they've got all this oil down there and we might need to go and take it. He actually said that in 2017. The boldness said that, wouldn't it be great if American companies were running Venezuela's oil interests? So we can see where this is going, and they're saying that all options are on the table, which means military. The United States has moved military into Colombia, and they've also moved the military people into the Caribbean and Puerto Rico and other places. So it is a dangerous situation. I think to talk about Venezuela, though, you have to understand a little bit of their history. And I know I'm supposed to talk about the Venezuelan crisis in 15 minutes or 20 minutes to leave time for questions, so I'll try and do my best. So before Chavez was elected in 1998, and during the 20th century, Venezuela is run by a duopoly. I'm sure we know what a duopoly is, two parties that switch back and forth. In the United States, we're well aware of that, how that works. And it was the Democratic Action and the Christian Democrats. And it was an extremely repressive state, and there was a lot of exclusion, poverty, illiteracy. In 1989, and the Venezuelan economy relied on oil. They relied on oil and loans. That was basically how they survived.
Oil and what?
Loans,
Loans.
international loans. In 1989, the price of oil had dropped, and the government made a huge loan from the IMF, which required austerity, selling off of state assets, cutting of subsidies to people. And there was this national uprising called the Caracazo, because it mainly happened in Caracas. That was the center of it. And there was a tremendous amount of repression by the state. Officially, 300 people died. Unofficially, people think that 3,000 people were killed by the government in '89. And that's when Chavez started his movement. I can't remember what he called his movement at the beginning. He started his movement in 1989 in reaction to the state repression. Chavez was able to gather together all different sectors of Venezuelan society, very many excluded sectors, fisher people, oil workers, intellectuals, and others into his movement. And to make a long story short, in 1998, he was actually elected. He was elected with 57% of the vote, okay? And that's a significant amount, because if you look at today, what the support of the government is 57%. So this coalition is still there, still supporting the government. And they're almost 60% of the population. They did a poll just last week, a public opinion poll, some big company, and they found that 57% of Venezuelans supported the government. Same amount that supported Chavez. Now, excuse me, Chavez, he brought a lot of reforms he nationalized oil. Even though he nationalized oil, there's still a huge private sector. It's bigger than the state sector, but he nationalized certain sectors of the oil industry that had officially been nationalized but had been turned over to private hands. He brought them back into the government, and it formed his oil sector. Okay. He also did a lot of other things. Under the rule of he called it the Bolivarian Revolution, after Simón Bolívar, who was the great leader of Latin American independence and social movement, a lot of the living standards and social indicators of Venezuelan people were increased. Okay, and this is despite a tremendous hostility from the United States. Okay, there was a coup in 2002. They actually kidnapped Chavez and took him to an island. But because of popular support in the streets and popular support in the army, he was released and brought back. There is sabotage of the economy. Okay, there's sabotage of their election. They have these things called guarimbas, who go on the street and set up blockades and attack police, attack people, and they've killed a lot of people. And they also have been lynching black people in these guarimberos. They call them guarimberos, because the coalition behind Chavez has more support on the mulatto and Afro people in Venezuela. And so there's a racial component to this whole thing. Despite this, social indicators in Venezuela have risen since 1998. And they have what they call missions. They have Barrio Dentro for healthcare. They have missions to teach youth music. These are all going to the poor neighborhoods, which have been traditionally excluded. They have Misión Vivienda for building houses. They have Mission Barrio Dentro for healthcare. And because of all these programs of the government, the poverty in Venezuela went down from approximately 43% to 26%. Okay? Extreme poverty went down from 17% to 7%. Children attending school went from 6 million to 13 million, 12 million, excuse me. Higher education attendance went up 4 times. So these were, and there's free universal health care instituted in Venezuela because of that. Unemployment has dropped. The Gini coefficient of inequality is very low compared to most other Latin American countries, so there's more equality in Venezuela than before. And infant mortality rates have dropped about 50%. Okay, we're just recently, these indicators have been going up, but we're going to see that's because of, first of all, there's the price of oil has dropped. And they're still dependent on oil, even though Chavez has tried, the Chavez and his government tried to diversify the economy and agriculture and other things, and it's more diverse than it was before. And also, since 2017, we have these sanctions, sanctions that are very disruptive of the Venezuelan economy because they don't have access to international credit, dollars, and things like that. So they have. I'm going to go over these claims now, but there's always been this hostility from the United States. But this is the reality of what poor people in Venezuela have experienced is increasing living standards, increasing education, and things of that nature. And the United States is talking about war, okay? So we have to be very careful about what we hear and what we see in the press. They're saying that Maduro is not legitimately elected, okay? Venezuela has one of the most transparent election systems in the world. Jimmy Carter, when he was there in 2012, said that they had the best electoral machinery in the world, and the United States had the worst. That's from Jimmy Carter. So that's what they had in 2018. They had an election for presidential election. Now their machines are much different than our machines. Okay, so they have a touch screen where you can vote, and after you vote, it prints out a paper ballot. You can check the paper ballot and see if the computer actually matches what you thought you voted for, and you can complain if it doesn't happen. But if not, you press it, you put it into a ballot box. Okay, so. The votes are tallied against the electronic tally as well as a manual tally. And people can see from the machine who they really voted for on paper. Now they also have they also have very highly sophisticated audits of their election, including one which they do on live national TV. So everybody in the country can see how the vote was tallied and how it works. Okay. So they're very highly audited. There were international observers there, and in fact, they just wrote letters to the European Commission complaining about what they were saying about the Venezuelan elections. Now, the opposition, who is supported by the United States, states that there were irregularities. The only problem is they don't tell us what the irregularities were. They don't tell us anything about that. They actually boycotted the election because they knew they were going to lose. And they boycotted the election so they could later say that the elections were not copacetic. So that's a red herring. They were regular elections that were completely open and transparent, much more transparent than what we have. In fact, as Jimmy Carter said, they were the most transparent in the world. Okay, so that's line number one that I wanted to go to. Line number two, that Maduro is a dictator. Well, they have a constitution, they have laws. And to me, a dictator is someone who has absolute power and can act in an arbitrary and harsh manner without anybody holding them back, so to speak, or her. As I said, we had a regular election. Well, let's just look at some examples. We have this opposition person, Leopoldo Lopez, who was part of the coup with Elliot Abrams in 2002, who was found guilty of the responsibility for the deaths of many people because of the Guarimberos, because he was inciting people to be violent in the street. And he was condemned by the Venezuelan courts. And what you can see is that, so it's so harsh, well, you know what, he's on house arrest. That's what he got for that. That's how harsh and dictator the government is. And also we had this gentleman called Guaido, who he was ordered by the Supreme Court not to leave the country because he's being investigated for crimes. And he left the country and he came back, and everybody's saying, well, he's going to be arrested. No, because there's a judicial process in play. And the court has granted a stay of execution on anything, so he was allowed to come back into the country. They respected the courts. That's hardly the actions of a dictator. Okay, so we have the next red herring we have is Maduro mismanaged the economy. Well, Venezuela has mismanagement and corruption just like any other country. But what we can see is that the economic problems are, first of all, they came from the price of oil. And second of all, they're from sanctions, the main problems. And if we were to have to invade a country because of mismanagement of a sector of their economy, well, have you ever seen our healthcare here in the United States? I mean, if that's not a mismanaged sector, I don't know what it is. But if you look at, there's a chart compared to exports of oil between Colombia and Venezuela, and they dropped during the drop in the price of oil, and they both dropped together. Because Colombia produces oil as well, not as much as Venezuela. But as soon as it hit 2017, when the sanctions started, Venezuela went way down. Their exports went way down because of the sanctions, because people can't buy from PDVSA, and they have it makes it extremely difficult to sell their oil on the world market and other products. It has also destabilized their currency because they don't have access to dollars. And if anybody comes from the dollar, you talk about dollar hegemony. Many third world countries, their currency is always in relation to the dollar, so you can't get dollars. Okay, so there's been mismanagement, but their problems are from us. It's like you grab somebody by the throat and you start squeezing on their trachea, and you blame them for choking. I mean, we're putting the sanctions on them. We're making the situation difficult for them. That's where the main problem comes from. That there's a humanitarian crisis. Okay, both the UN and the International Red Cross says there's no humanitarian crisis. There are some problems with distribution. It's hard to get medicine. But they say there's no humanitarian crisis, but they're using this like weapons of mass destruction. I can't remember what it was in Libya. They were taking rape drugs or something and raping people. I can't remember what it was. But the United States is using this thing of humanitarian crisis as an excuse to try and enter the country. And as far as the humanitarian aid at the borders, Venezuela said, no, we don't want your humanitarian aid. You're not entering our country. And there's certain reasons for that. First of all, they're getting humanitarian aid from the United Nations. They're getting it from China. They're getting it from Russia. They're getting it from Cuba. And they offered $20 million of humanitarian aid. Well, the sanctions have cost them $30 billion. And you're going to give them $20 million? Number one. Number two, they're concerned that they're going to use that as an excuse to enter with arms and Colombian paramilitaries and opponents of the regime to start military action. So the Venezuelan government thinks that they're using that as a beachhead to enter the country. And you have to remember that in Nicaragua, it was Elliot Abrams who was organizing the Contras entering into Nicaragua to kill and maim and destroy people, and he's back again in our government. Okay, so that's hardly that's another red herring. And then like Guaido is the legitimate ruler. I mean, that's the most absurd thing I've ever heard, that the President of the United States can declare somebody a president in another country. So I suppose he could, Macron is having problems with the yellow vests, and Macron is very unpopular, actually, in France, and I guess Trump can just get up there and declare somebody else the president of France. No. they think they can do that with Venezuela. They try and justify it by Article 233 of their Constitution. That's only when the president, that applies when the president of Venezuela is not available, but he is available. He's there, he's in power, and he's available. And even in the case that he wasn't available, they have all sorts of reasons for inability, illness, mental health, or a recall by the Venezuelan people. That's another thing. They have the right of recall, and there's the opposition hasn't tried to recall Maduro because they know they're going to lose. So that's really a gross interference in the internal affairs of Venezuela, and it violates the United Nations Charter and international law. And because of that, it violates our law, because international law is U.S. law under our Constitution. Under Article 2 of the United Nations Charter, the countries have the rights to sovereignty and non-interference in their internal affairs. And this is a gross interference in the internal affairs of the country of Venezuela. Now, they're talking about all options on the table, and I think it's up to us to take some of these options off the table, because these options should not be on the table. The option of military force should not be on the table in international affairs. That's why we have diplomacy, that's why we have negotiations, that's why we have interchanges, that's why we have the United Nations, so that people can work out their problems in a peaceful way. And under international law, there's only two reasons for the use of military force. And one of them is when the United Nations declare that there's an imminent risk of a problem with peace and security, and they declare that force may be used. And second of all, we'll get it. Second of all, in the case of self-defense, it has to be actual self-defense or imminent threat of harm. And so what the United States is talking about is war propaganda, which is illegal. And so I think what we have to do is make sure that we, as a people, tell our government that we don't want war on Venezuela, that Venezuela is a sovereign country, that Venezuela can manage its own affairs without our interference, without our blockades. And blockades are illegal under international law. The sanctions are illegal. I forgot to mention that. They only can be sanctioned under Title 7 of the United Nations Charter. And so they're illegal because they affect civilian populations rather than just combatants.
Before I do that, and here's why I decided a week ago that I wanted to organize this panel. And the reason I wanted to organize it is because it's not because I had a strong opinion one way or the other about President Maduro or about the nature of the economic situation in Venezuela, which from what I've been able to find certainly didn't seem to be good right now. But those were not the things that prompted me to organize this panel. What prompted me to organize this panel is that I've been watching my government for 40 years intervene violently in other nations around the world and make things surprisingly even worse than they already were in the places where we have intervened. So I will tell you that I am terrified that that is going to happen again to Venezuela. I think it would be a terrible, terrible thing. And I don't think that our views about intervention or no intervention, I was very glad to hear your view on that. I don't think that those views need to turn on resolving the debate that is happening in this panel right now, which is making me a little bit sad and disappointed, although I understand why it's happening. But I feel that the urgency of the moment has to do with what our government is going to do and whether the people who live in this country are going to push back against the idea that we have the right to use military force in situations where there are serious questions about whether we might, in fact, as a government, be actually pursuing U.S. Economic interests and supporting the interests of global U.S. conglomerates and oil companies in particular that feel that they don't like what has happened in Venezuela politically and economically. And so the bottom line is what is going to happen in the next few weeks. And I would love for us to have some time to talk about that. And so that's just what I want to say. I do want to let Mark respond, but I hope that he can do that semi-briefly, because I feel like these debates could take us the next many hours and would not resolve the question of what should our government here do.
Right.
I was wondering, this is kind of for you who spoke first. So obviously I agree that I don't think we should have military interference in Venezuela, but as someone who's been in a region where there has been interference, would you say it's beneficial, I guess in your opinion, just as someone who's experienced that and just in general, is it beneficial to have the U.S. intervene at all in terms of bringing humanitarian aid, or would you rather just see us just totally not interfere in any sense, military or otherwise? Because I feel like, in a sense, it's like, yeah, we should help, maybe we should bring them some stuff, or maybe we should just say totally hands off.
Okay. So I understand that there is a legitimate concern from the people here in the U.S. about the well-being of the Venezuelan people. It is not the role of the U.S. government to intervene with whatever the Venezuelan people have decided. We might not be in agreement in how the process was done. I personally have issues with the process of the Nicaraguan election, the last election, but we have to respect that was the result. We, as U.S. citizens, I don't think we should have any role in any military intervention anywhere. I am a U.S. citizen that grew up in a country that was on the verge of an invasion constantly. It is not fun to grow up seeing your friends die. It's not fun to grow up knowing that you don't know if you're going to see your cousins in the States. I had a cousin in the Army. I asked him once when we came to visit for the holidays, what are you going to do when they send you to invade Nicaragua? So I don't think it is our role as U.S. citizens to come and say, this is what we need to do in Venezuela. We have to respect what Venezuelan people are doing. If the Venezuelan government says we do not want this humanitarian aid, I do agree that it's an excuse to come and intervene, right? We might say intervene instead of invade,
Right.
But it is not for us. There are international bodies that we have agreed with the international community that have the role to do that. I understand that there are Venezuelan people here. I understand growing up in Nicaragua, living the revolution, I had friends that left because they were not in agreement with the revolution. And I respect that. Some of us had to leave afterwards. Some of us are in agreement with what is happening, and some of us are not. And that's just the true, it's the reality. And we do understand that there are a lot of issues with the current government. But there has been a lot of progress. Like there was in Nicaragua during the 80s. We had social programs. We eradicated illiteracy. Things have changed, yes, over the last 20 years. But still, it is not the role of the U.S. to intervene in any country. And I want to bring to your attention that there is a bill in the House and the Senate discussing this, that is being supported by Senator Merkley to prevent any unauthorized military action in Venezuela. So I would like to bring that to your attention, to support this bill. We need to find other ways of supporting the Venezuelan people that is not with the U.S. intervention. So a long answer to say, no, I do not think we have any role. We should not be doing anything that has to do with an intervention. It's been shown, as Nancy has mentioned, that it doesn't create any positive outcome.
Right.
Yes.
So I just want to add to what you said about the elections. So I was there in Venezuela last year.
Can you stand up and speak a little louder, please?
I was in Venezuela during the last election process, and I went to vote, and I saw the people in the table where you voted talking to this lady and said, "Oh, you work in this school, right?" And she said, "Yes." "Okay, so you know you have to vote for Maduro, right?" She said, "No, I can vote for whoever." "Okay, then say goodbye to your job." That is the new system. It's not the machine. The machine doesn't matter whether or not it works. It's a coercion to people. People are afraid to speak out because they're gonna lose the job that pay nothing. Yes.
My grandfather was told he lost his job in Louisiana because he didn't vote for Huey P. Long. But Venezuela didn't come and use military force against our country when that happened.
Just a point. I think all that are here, we are not pro-intervention. What we don't want is the spread of lies about what is happening in Venezuela. Okay?
I agree with you completely. Thank you.
I'm going to get a new voice just because we haven't heard from this lady.
Well, I could show you every country that I've been in since my first trip to Mexico in 1968, when the Army was unleashed on protesting students during the run-up to the 1968 Olympics. That was my first massacre that I witnessed. That was orchestrated, in fact, not merely by the Mexican government against its own people, but also with the direct connivance of the United States. And I can show you, going down that map, for example, my first visit to Colombia and to Venezuela. When I was a graduate student here, one of the first and probably the last of the old joint degree program with Corbell, then called the Graduate School of International Studies. And I was on a so-called fact-finding mission in which I was attempting to pull together on the ground and with my own eyes something that would jive with the theories of economic development and political liberalism that I was hearing at the law school and the graduate school. Realism on the ground looks very different than it does in theory. People were suffering everywhere. Everywhere was what you could call a failed state. And yet the only places that the United States would intervene were the places where poor people were trying to do something on their own behalf and were being hammered over and over again by a wealthy coterie that was directly tied to the United States. And we can get into that if you really want to, but I want to leave you, I'll try to be brief, with just two things. If you want to take a look at the people that are orchestrating this intended coup d'etat, which if it fails, will be a call for direct US intervention, you need to look at the history. You don't simply argue about Maduro being good or bad, especially from here. You have to look at the actual history on the ground. When I came over here, I drove over and did my little bit to destroy the rest of the planet by burning up the last tank of gas that I have that came from Citgo. Citgo? Anybody ever heard of it?
Yeah.
Okay. They have 3 refineries on the Gulf Coast, which used to import mainly Venezuelan oil. And then Citgo, being a subsidiary of the Venezuelan Petroleum Company, right, would distribute the refined products in the United States through the Citgo companies. Today, as a result of sanctions, every penny you spend at Citgo goes, instead of to the government of Venezuela, where it has an opportunity to be distributed in literacy programs, construction of schools, medical clinics, hospitals, and so on. Instead, it goes to this rump government established by the United States in the name of Guaido. And of course, the lady is shaking her head. I'll debate you any day on this.
Well,
okay?
please. That I would love to.
And what is that money going to be used for? For the benefit of the Venezuelan people? No, to finance a coup d'etat. This is the culmination of a 20-year campaign. This is not something that emerged in the last few years under Maduro. It's been a 20-year campaign to make the economy scream. Now, why do I use those words? I didn't invent those words. Those were the notes that the director of the CIA, Richard Helms, wrote down after meeting with Nixon and Kissinger in 1970 to plan out the famous 2 tracks. One was to directly instigate a coup d'etat right away. Assassinations, blowing up pylons for electrical power, sabotage of the economy. And the other, took 3 years, was to slowly strangle the economy until not just the rich, but that everyone, starting from the poor, so that the economy screamed. And that's exactly what they did. I was there in 1973. I saw it with my own eyes. And what happened? The United States said, we're going to relieve you from the evil socialist government, El Salvador Allende. And instead, they murdered at least 4,000 people, including a bunch of friends of mine. The only reason I'm standing here today is that I'm buried in a mass grave, undiscovered and disappeared, like my friends Charlie Horman and Frank Teruggi and so many other Chileans and others, is because I got a phone call. Come home, right? Well, what's going on? I got a telegram the next day, come home, please, stop. I'm pregnant, stop. I love you, stop. My unborn baby daughter saved my life from the very fascists that are going to try to do the same thing in Venezuela. If we here, instead of listening to the people that are saying, oh, but Maduro's bad, allow the Venezuelan people themselves, fail or succeed, whatever they may do, it's up to them. It's not up to the people that brought you the Iraq War. If you want to learn more about Iran-Contra and Nicaragua, I refer you to a series of stories I did 2 years ago predicting exactly this, based on that past experience. You'll find them at whowhatwhy.org, okay, if you care to look a little deeper. Finally,
Doug, yeah, I think I need
the
to
most
cut you off.
subversive thing in America, a friend of mine once wrote and sang, is a long memory. Let's hope you live long enough to have one.
That's a good quote. We have about 2 more minutes. I'm not sure if there's any point in opening up the whole discussion again. I know this has been difficult for a lot of people. I really so appreciate all of the perspectives that were represented here and the people who came and spoke what obviously came from very strong feelings and also from knowledge that they have about Venezuela. I have never been to Venezuela, so as someone who you know is trying as hard as I can to get the best information I can as a U.S. citizen who wants our country to stop being violent around the world. I really appreciate having heard all of the perspectives that were voiced. I hope that you will go back and talk to your friends and family, and no matter what you think about how this should be accomplished, I hope that if you think that the U.S. should not invade, you'll try really hard to make sure that that message gets out to people, because if not, we're going to be in trouble and Venezuela's going to be in a world of hurt. So thank you so much, all of you, for coming.